is. It's so much needed for so long. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we're in this kind of in this space. I'll give you, you want this glass? Yes, you want it? I'm just going to
I'm unabashed.
Oh yeah, you do what you have to do.
I'm shallow, so.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Sparkling water for you? Well, it's nice that at least 3 of you could come in person, because I know not everyone was able to travel.
Yeah.
Oh no! The luggage never made it? Oh,
Hello? AV, we don't need any video. We're just going to be talking amongst ourselves, so no video. Thank you.
do you want to ask if they can put up the name of this? If they can.
If you have the name of our symposium, that can be placed on the screen. I can, oh, okay.
They don't have it? They do.
That was a no.
Oh, they don't have it. Okay. I thought they did that. Maybe I was confused. All right. We can do this. Maybe.
I was waiting to make sure Gwen would make a connection.
As long as you have a mic, because you'll be doing the talking.
You three have mics.
Okay, welcome everybody to our symposium. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rosanna Olsen. I'm the current chair of the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee at OHBM. I'm actually the outgoing chair, and seated next to me is Lucina Uden, who is the incoming chair. And this is the 4th symposium that our committee has put on. The symposium has changed the theme that we've covered from year to year. And the theme that we chose to cover this year, our symposium is called The Asian Perspective on Social, Cultural, and Language Barriers to Inclusivity at OHBM. And this we felt was a topical and timely topic to discuss as a group. And so we have invited a group of OHBM members who some have been in the organization for quite some time, some are newer to the organization. And I'm going to invite my co-moderators. We'll be asking them some questions about their experiences. And please feel free also to submit questions to the speakers on the app. But we'll start out first with some introductions, just so you can get to know the people up on the stage right now. So I've already introduced Lucina, but I will also now introduce Amanpreet Badwar, who is our past chair of the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee, and she's also going to be moderating the session. And now I'm going to ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves, to say their name, their institute, and also how many years they've been attending OHBM. So I'll start with Bharat Biswal.
Hello, my name is Bharat Biswal. I'm a professor of biomedical engineering in New Jersey Institute of Technology. I work mostly in functional MRI and brain connectivity. The first conference of OHBM that I went was the second one in 1996 in Boston. Thank you.
So long-time attendee. And our next speaker, Hiromasa Takamura.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hiromasa Takemura. I'm a professor of the National Institute for Physiological Sciences in Japan. Well, my first attendance of the OHBM, I think it was Seattle. I think it's 2013. So I'm relatively new because I didn't do lots of imaging stuff during PhD. So.
And Natasha Raja.
Hi, I'm Natasha Raja. I'm a professor at McGill University at the Department of Psychiatry. My first attendance here at OHBM was in 1999, so a while ago.
Great. And I also just wanted to mention that we had two other speakers who we intended to include in the panel. So one is Kang-Ju Lee. She's a postdoctoral fellow at Yale University, and she unfortunately couldn't make it in person. And we also invited Chao Yan Yang from, I think he's from Beijing, but I can't remember the name of his university right now. Chinese Academy of Sciences, thank you. But maybe we might be able to make some of the online content available from Chao Gan and Kang-Ju. So I'm going to pass it now to Lucina, who's going to kick off the discussion.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. We also have done a panel video recorded previously, just in the off chance that some of the speakers couldn't make it. So you will be able to see comments from all of these speakers, as well as Kang-Ju and Jagan on the OHBM, the virtual platform. So we're really excited to be able to address this topic today. We were previously had the diversity symposia topics on gender biases in neuroscience. We've talked about LGBTQ issues in neuroscience. We've talked about racial bias in neuroscience. And so this year, for our fourth topic, we thought we would touch on something that's not as often discussed, which is, but still exists. So we wanted to get some speakers' thoughts on this. And it's more of a panel discussion than a presentation, because we think it's the kind of topic that doesn't lend itself well to slides. So, so please do feel free to ask the panelists questions as we go along. But just to get us started off, I have a question for Hiromasa. Can you, well, I'll start out with the congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
On your Early Career Investigator Award. It's fantastic of an achievement, and it's historically been given to researchers in North America and Europe. So my question to you is, how did you feel when you first learned that you won this award?
Well, I really appreciate it. So I'd like to thank again for council members, all award committee members. Well, it's not always possible to get this type of recognition, and I really appreciate the opportunity. At the same time, I have some mixed feeling, because there are so many other great scientists doing good works who are not really nominated, but, well, maybe it's my responsibility to just continue good science. Well, regarding Asian thing, maybe I have to mention that I'm not the first awardee from the Asian country. So in recent year, maybe Thomas Yeo from Singapore is the first case. Then second case, Chao Yang Gao, you have the right name, sorry, he is from China. So maybe nowadays it's not very rare that the people from Asian country get this type of recognition. But over the history, I'm the first Japanese. So in that case, I'm very appreciated. Then I'm kind of feel responsible for support junior scientists in one country to just get more recognition or getting used to the international communities. And I hope that there should be a bright future for our own community. Then I should take a role, yes.
I still have a question for Hiromasa, because I actually got to know Hiromasa when there was a blog post that came to our attention. So Hiromasa, can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write the blog post about why relatively few Japanese people give talks at OHBM?
Well, I think people have a discussion, especially it was a conference at Hawaii. I think those periods, I think we have the subjective discussion, like people from Japan really don't get talks. Actually, I was also the same member of ISMRM. Then same discussion was there, because I'm also a member of ISMR Japanese chapter. There are some discussion internally, like maybe the rate of the people apply for oral session was very small. I think people really always choose poster-only option in ISMRM. Then I just would like to check the same just phenomenon really happening in the OHBM. I think it looks like the same phenomenon occurs, but that's the initial motivation. But I think it's not my original finding. I think the discussion already occurred in ISMRM, and I just recognize it and just bring it to this community.
Thanks so much for sharing. I'm going to just go around a little bit and ask a few of our panelists some questions. Maybe I'll go over to Natasha here and ask about an interesting, what are your thoughts on this? So we conducted a poll, a survey a while ago on feelings of belonging at OHBM and received 170 responses, but only a few individuals from East Asian countries and Asian countries responded, and South Asian countries. Do you have any ideas for encouraging more participation or changing the culture or improving the feelings of inclusivity at the conference that you think we could work towards?
Sure, thanks for that question. So, when you don't get responses to surveys, it's sometimes because you've ended up in spam. So I don't know if that's what happened here. But I do think one of the things that has helped in some of the surveys that we've done locally, like at McGill or at Douglas, has been to have it sent by individuals from the community. So if there is a contact person within each of your, kind of a chapter leader in some ways, and reaching out to them so they can then personally send out that email. That email's less likely to go to spam first, and also people will feel like there is a connection there and there's a reason that they will be heard if they make a response. Because I think sometimes people see these surveys, there's so many EDI surveys that come around for us now that I think there's a bit of exhaustion and I have to answer this again. But if it comes from someone that you think represents you, hears you, and then will represent you to the organization, there's a bit more buy-in, and you could get more response rates there.
Okay, I'm going to switch to Bharat a bit. So in 1995, you published the first paper, now cited over 9,000 times, that started the field of resting state functional connectivity, and it really revolutionized brain networks. So do you think that it's more difficult for scientists from Asian backgrounds to be recognized for their contribution to human brain mapping?
Okay, so that's a difficult question. I'll try to answer. So first, I don't think, thinking of an idea, I don't think pertains to any particular domain, and anyone can think of an idea and then publish it. And I think if you look at human brain mapping field in general, I would say that we all depend on the work by Seiji Ogawa, who first developed BOLD. The first fMRI paper is by Ken Kwong. At that time, there were 3 papers that was published. The first paper in fMRI was by Ken Kwong. Similarly, at around the same time, there was a paper from Minnesota by Ravi Menon, and the third one was by Peter Bandicchini. So I don't think one can claim that all religions started from one continent. At least in science, you cannot say that. I think in my case, in resting state, I had a little more trouble than I would say Ken Kwong or Peter or Ravi, simply because in task activation, there was spec literature that you could relate to. There was electrophysiology and other modalities. For resting state, there wasn't much, and also all the reviewers who were reviewing the paper were doing task activation. And one thing, if you have to remember, or at least at that time people would remember about task activation, is that when you do something, there will be a response in some part of your brain. And the second thing is that when you are not presenting that stimulus, everything else is noise. So I think that was my biggest problem.
Thank you for those insights. Maybe a question both for Bharat and Natasha, since you've been coming to this meeting for a while now. I just want to see what your perspective is on what changes have you seen throughout the years attending this meeting? Have the changes been for the better? Have you felt more included, or how have you felt as the years have gone by?
Started first.
Well, I would say a lot. Well, first, perhaps when I was a student, we would never discuss anything other than work with our advisor, right? And like, if anyone discussed politics, for example, then, they were not serious scientists, right? So we only discussed work. And I think, perhaps that's in some way good that people, like whatever changes that is happening in the world, they discuss in the lab because, now some of those things are becoming more important. And, perhaps like now the assumption is we are humans first and then maybe later scientists. So I would say that was one. The other thing is that at that time, like around, I would say around 95, 96, I don't think there were many centers in China or India, or maybe in Japan there were, but I don't know. There were very few centers outside of US and Europe which had any neuroimaging capability. In fact, I know many of the researchers from China, India, and so on, because they would visit to Wisconsin where the General Electric medical system was to see their setup, and then they would come to our college to see how it was working. So from that point of view, like neuroimaging, so when I graduated, if I wanted to find a job, there was no job outside of US and Europe. So, and even for PhD, there was no chance. So in that respect, there are many more centers, right? Like, I would say there are many centers which are in Asia, even South Africa, Australia, where it's just as good as any imaging centers in India. So that has, I would say those are the two major differences.
Thanks.
So I've been coming to this conference since 1999, and one thing I have noticed to the positive is like that the gender balance has definitely increased in OHBM over the few years, which is great to see. There's things like this, the EDI committee, there's definitely more attention and more consideration of the challenges faced by people from different communities and backgrounds, which is great to see. At the end, though, I still think there's work to be done, and it's great to have these symposia to talk about it. One of the things is, you see people attend from diverse backgrounds, and it's nice to see more and more balance in the speakers, and hopefully we keep moving towards having more and more and award recipients, and that it's growing. I think we're not fully balanced yet, but it's growing, and it's nice to see that OHBM is taking this seriously and is really a leader in that way, because there's many conferences out there and you don't see the balance, and you do see males still out there in certain fields. So it's nice to see gender balance and also the representation that OHBM is trying for. It would be great to see more of that on the executive level and who is making the decisions and things like that, but we're getting there. So it's definitely changed.
Maybe I'll take the next question, and it's for all of you. So do you think there are cultural differences between the East and the West in the acceptability of self-promotion in academia? Because the West certainly works a certain way. How do these cultural expectations impact researchers from Asia who are trying to navigate Western academic institutions? And also researchers who are here and of Asian origins, but have been brought up in a different culture at home, right? So I think that might be a good question for all three of you. Maybe.
I should start? All right, thank you very much. Well, I did a postdoc in US for 3 years, and I saw many cultural differences, of course, many commonalities, but I'm not really a history expert, but historically, Eastern Asian countries have a very exam culture. Maybe some of you may experience. I think high school students usually evaluated just based on exams, so they study hard, but usually university admission outcome doesn't really heavily depends upon later volunteer experiences and sort of self-promotion part, then which is very different from maybe Western culture where the university admissions are quite sometimes based on interview or letters and some records of the volunteer. Then for as so many just students just working with, I think there are some mental barriers for self-promotion because I think educational system doesn't emphasize in that way, more emphasizing knowledge evaluation, and then following a rule. There are some conformist cultures, and I think there are not so many encouragement or self-promotion, but in order to get grant, job, or adapting some whole academic international environment, I think we need some self-promotion. That the way I find some difficulty in mentoring some Japanese student or some Asian student and postdocs, so how to just ask them to keep the border to just block the mental barrier. I still don't find a way to how to just guide them.
So I think there's definitely some differences. Like I was raised in the West, but my family of origin is South Asian. And so the way you talk about yourself at home is very different. And when you do succeed, like the way the response of the parent and the family is very different. Like, oh, that's great, what's next? You know, it's never, oh, let's take a moment and celebrate your success. It's more like, well, what can you improve? And I think that's a very cultural difference that, like, especially if you're an immigrant, where it's what's your next step? That's like you take a very small amount of time to kind of, there's no self-congratulation really. It's really, oh, that's great, now what are you gonna do next? So that's a cultural difference at home that I face, and as like now in the academic field, you definitely notice when you receive recommendation letters from different cultures for students, that there are differences, and that's important for search committees and, you know, mentors to know, because the Western letters are very effusive, and, you know, this person walks on water, you know, whereas letters from South Asia and East and Asia are very, like, frank and very pragmatic and very, this is what this person does, and to the point, and it's not so much on, like, it's not as effusive. They don't use as much, you know, oh, this, the rising star, you know, words like that are rarely used in certain cultures. So it's, I think it's important for us to be mindful when we're mentors and when we're on panels or, you know, grant reviews, that the letters we receive from different countries are very different. It doesn't reflect the person necessarily.
So I guess, again, I'm just speaking for like myself, so typically, I think as he mentioned, like when I was finishing high school, there was one exam that you had to give, and that would decide your entire fate. Like which school you went to, which branch of engineering you studied, or things like that. So, like my mother would always say, we could never complain about teacher, because my mother would say, did the teacher give that punishment to any other student? And if the answer is no, then what did you do that the teacher gave you that punishment, right? So, so coming to grad school, I think some of the other things were that we had, I should say, I had always like studied, okay, you have to prepare for this exam, and then when you finish engineering, you have to prepare for another exam, and so on. So perhaps I was not like well-rounded, so I had like studied like physics, engineering, and other sciences, but not what a typical undergraduate in US has taken, like literature classes and so on. So that was one handicap. The second would be like just spoken English. Like I'm from a fairly remote area, so we didn't speak English often. Like English was one course and we would learn and that was it. And so coming to US, it would be like very difficult because anything someone said, first you would have to understand what this person was saying, and which always seemed very fast. And then you would have to translate what you would say, and then translate, and then hopefully when you said it, they would understand. If they said, excuse me, then you thought like, did I misunderstood the question? And then the writing. So like for us, the writing was done according to the British way, which was like long and complex sentences. And my advisor, the first paper I gave, but maybe that's why my paper got rejected so many times, is that he said, no, it's not good. You have to bring me back another version. So after a couple of versions, he said, okay, now I'll read it. Because I think my advisor knew like students from India typically write in certain ways. So those were some of the among the many handicaps I had. And also like I didn't have, I had like skipped bio in high school because I was afraid if I couldn't get into engineering that my parents would ask me to study medicine. So I had skipped. So when I came, I had to study extra hard to take those courses in grad school. But I would say that now students who are coming from India and even China, I think they are, I would say, much better rounded than I was. The English is much better, and I think the writing is also fairly good. So.
This is a very good segue, Brad. Thank you. A lot of the audience has been wondering, so I'll ask this question from the audience for anyone who wants to answer. In terms of language barriers, what actions could be taken to make it more inclusive here at OHBM for language barriers? What would you like to see?
Well, I always say practice makes it perfect, right? So write more papers. Well, that is, I mean, I think that is certainly, the more you practice, it's better. But also, I would say, like, read a lot of scientific papers. Like, when, again, I know I'm old, but so I was in grad school when NeuroImage came out. So we would read, like, from cover to cover, every paper. And a lot of times, so when we wrote, we would see how, let's say, Carl Friston or Alan Evans and others were writing. What was the format they used? How was the introduction? Is it like 4 paragraph or is it 5 paragraph? And then try to write accordingly. And then similarly for the methods, materials and methods. I always, actually I should say, still find like the materials and methods and the results is the easy part, right? Then the introduction and discussion is the most difficult part. And I think that's where perhaps practice, and then you can show it to your friends and colleagues and ask them for comments. There is also something called Grammarly, which I have seen many students use, which is great.
So I have a question listening to all of you. Especially if you're coming from a different country to North America. First of all, like, you don't get here without being super high up in your achievement list, because especially when you came, Bharat, like, you had to be super achieved to even get into graduate school here, right? And I'm sure same with you, Hiramasa. So, we are focusing a lot on what we as Asians can do to improve ourselves, right? But I guess what I would like to hear or one of the things I'd like to hear from perhaps all of you, is what was your one positive experience of feeling included in this culture, and one experience where it could have been better if something was done a bit differently by the, you know, by the population, the majority population?
So, so it's a very difficult question. So first, I wouldn't say I was super accomplished. I had just done well on GRE. And at that time, if you applied for PhD or master's, generally they would, if your score and other things were good, if you got TA-ship or tuition waiver, that helped a lot, right? I don't think I could have come to US if someone had, there was no way my parents could have paid. But coming to US, I found that there were other people also who had maybe even more humbling background than I did. But once in school, they were all working hard and trying to do better. In terms of the most surprising part was people in US, I was in Wisconsin, were extremely polite and very nice. Again, I think I have mentioned before that my advisor was a physicist by the name of Jim Hyde, who had many other really famous students like Peter Bandettini, who you saw. So when every paper of mine was getting rejected, every paper of Peter's was getting accepted in Nature. I don't think he has a paper in Nature. Maybe Journal of Neuroscience, really good journals. And I think my advice, so Peter came back, he went to Harvard and came back as assistant professor, and I didn't even have to leave Wisconsin. I just stayed there and I was given a same position. So I think that is, that really helped my career. I haven't had much complaints in scientific community. Although I would be stupid to not take into account there is discrimination and other things that occur. You read it in the paper and so on. But I would say, because of my mentor, I was very, very lucky.
Thank you.
So I'd like to answer that question too. I think a really great positive experience I had was I had a really great PhD mentor that introduced me to people, and when I was at conferences would take me to dinner with the PIs that he was going to dinner with. And so I had the exposure and I built the confidence to be able to talk to these people. I'm like, oh, but the doors were opened. And I think having a good mentor that opens the doors is very important. On the other side, what could be improved, and this kind of touches upon the previous question that Bharat responded to. I think, it might be hard for an organization to start chapters, but you, the members, can always connect with each other and start these homegrown communities, and I really hope that happens. And in those homegrown communities, you could use the language of choice, right? And not necessarily use English for communication, for peer mentoring and helping each other and develop that community. So when you come to OHBM, you'll know other people from your community, and you could have outings and get-togethers and build that community culture as well. Because I do think that's something that could be strengthened, just bringing other ways of thinking, other ways of doing science, and other languages to OHBM. So you shouldn't be forced to always adapt and speak English. We should meet you halfway so you could speak your language and have communities that you could fully express yourself in as well.
Yeah, this is actually a good segue into one of the audience questions that's come up. maybe I'll start with Hiramasa, and then if anyone else wants to add. But the question is about challenges that exist in the social event. So, we come here to network and to see science. So we have club night and we have the reception. So what are some of the challenges that you think that, that minority groups face, when attending the social part of the conference?
Well, that's very difficult for first half because, well, when you're just first coming to the international conference, you have mental barrier, but I think one person to one person communication in English is actually okay. You can just do it easily, but if there's just 10 people just speaking randomly, random order, that's very hard for non-native speaker first coming to international conferences. And also the background noise level gets higher. The auditory comprehension gets challenges. So yeah, I think we had a similar discussion in the virtual version. Well, for example, club night is very fun, but it's a tough place for non-native speaker first coming to the OHBM because there is a lot of music, hard to communicate. It might be good if you have a kind of venue for small people can gather, know each other, then talking slowly. That could be more helpful. Then maybe we can just be more friendly in the noisy situation with larger number of people. But yes, it cannot be easy to honest because if you are not using a native language, 10 people talking to each other, that's just tough, yes. You shouldn't feel worried about it because that's what happens to everybody, yes.
I would go with more audience questions.
So here's a question that comes from the audience. It says, what advice would you give to an Asian early career scientist to better advocate for oneself as a minority in these spaces? And I'll let anybody answer who would like to answer. Or should I put somebody on the spot?
I think nothing can substitute good work. And I think that should be the, again, I'm sorry, I think nothing can substitute good work, and perhaps that should be the main focus. In addition to that, if I think as is being mentioned, networking with other friends and colleagues would help. Again, also getting good mentors. And it doesn't just have to be your PhD advisor. It could be someone working maybe in the same university or maybe different university on a similar topic would be good. I think those would be.
Well, I think if you have a chance to work with many different people, well-established groups, well-recognized and respected scientists in different places in the region, maybe you should get a chance to get recognized. Well, in my case, well, in some sense, maybe being Asia is a kind of handicap because I think it's much harder to just communicate people in the outside, but the benefit is if you just organize an event locally, then invite somebody else, then you can just spend whole time with that particular invited speaker. And I just invited Carl Zels, Michel Thibaudot-Chotten, or Peter Bandettini. We just become all friendly. We have very good time. Then they like Japan. We spend a lot of time. Then we know each other. Then actually that type of activity is very helpful to here in Asia. Then if the COVID is over, I think it's always a good idea to make some small conference or meeting, some opportunity locally. Then there are people who are just opening to just come to Japan. Then eventually you can just get the chance to collaborate with them. Then maybe that will just increase the chance to get recognized.
Yeah, I think it also depends on, that's a very general, the type of advocacy you're seeking, and knowing that there are different people beyond your mentor if you need to advocate for yourself that you could reach out to in your department that you're in, and also within your community. So definitely, if you want to advocate and get your name out, inviting, attending smaller talks, smaller conferences, getting to know the community locally, that's really important. But if it's something a bit more specific, I think it's important to know within your community and within your graduate program who to go to. And sometimes we just look at our lab, but there's a whole department that's there that you should kind of look at and see who could advocate for you, who could you reach out to that might be similar to you, have had similar experiences on the community level at your department maybe, and they could advocate for you as well.
So I know I'm not a panelist, but I just want to put in my 2 cents about self-advocacy, because I actually have found that things have changed so much since people started using Twitter. It's much easier to communicate with people you don't know. For example, like somebody posts a paper and you just make a comment and suddenly you can start communicating. It's easier than emailing someone out of the blue. You know, it feels more like a conversation. So if you're shy or whatever, to approach PIs or to look for mentorship or to approach a collaboration, I sometimes find that Twitter reduces the barrier a lot, because it's a very casual environment and there's a lot of academics out there. And OHBM is very active on Twitter. So I think, people say a lot of negative things about Twitter, but I think in this case, it's actually a good tool for self-advocacy.
So perhaps I have a question of my own. So we've been talking a lot about the Asian experience, but we also know that there's a little bit of a difference on how you mentor an Asian male versus an Asian woman because of the cultural differences that we're brought up with. So would you have any advice, like any of you, on that? Or how you've approached it yourself?
Being an Asian woman, I don't notice those differences because you only know your experience. I think having one thing I do in my lab to kind of avoid any sort of implicit biases coming into how I mentor differently is I write it down, what my policies are and the approach to mentorship that I take, and what I expect and be open to feedback, and I put it out there so the students know who I am, and they could also give feedback onto how they want to be mentored. But yeah, it's hard to, when by definition an implicit bias is implicit, right? So it is hard, and I just hope that my trainees, if they do sense any sort of bias, will come to me with that information. I think that's all as a mentor you could really do to keep it open and bi-directional. I try not to mentor differently, but I'm in that intersection, so maybe that's why it's easier for me, whereas people that aren't in that intersection might feel a bit different. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm just mentoring a couple of just female members, and I'm honestly not sure I'm a good member or not. I can judge myself, but I'm not really make substantial changes. Just doing a regular meeting, just meeting carefully, just talking with them, then just give them advice. So, well, I don't have a magic answer, but I just try to be careful and just deal with professionally. Then hopefully they're happy, but I can't judge myself.
So we had a specific question about, it says, how do those from less represented Southeast Asian groups feel more included when they don't see others like them? So for those of you on the panel from that background, how have you felt, what have you done to feel more included?
I had a one-word answer. My cure to everything is work hard, and I know it's not the best approach. And it's not, but I'm going to let Natasha answer, and maybe I'll come back to it.
Maybe Bharat has something.
Maybe Bharat has something as well to say.
Actually, I didn't hear the question.
I think in general, the question was how do you sort of maybe cope when you don't see too many other people like you, in those spaces, and you just think, okay, I'm the only one here. I've had this experience my whole career. I'm the only woman on the thing. I'm the only not white person on the thing. And this happens, and it happens less nowadays. But at first you notice it and you feel very conspicuous, right? Because you think, whatever I say, they're going to think all women are like that. Whatever I say, they're going to say, well, all Asians think this way because you're the only one there. So at first, it feels like a big responsibility, that you have to speak for your whole group just because you're the only one there. But I think people have become much more aware of this, so you want to, be like, oh, I'm speaking as a person with my own experience, with my own individual identity, and what you see is that I represent the whole group, but the group is diverse. All South Asian women are not the same. They haven't had the same experiences. So I think just like when you find yourself in those positions, the way I've coped is by trying to use the power that comes in that position to make it more diverse, to invite more people to the panel, invite more people to the editorial board, change the construction of the committee. Once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. That's why, OHBM has a mandatory policy of having symposia with members from different geographical regions, because, once you realize, the benefit of that, it's hard to see it any other way. So I think personally, the way I've dealt with it is by trying to push against it, and every time it happens.
Yeah. So, from my experience, definitely, I've had very similar experiences of being, and trying not to shrink away. Instead of seeing the difference as a negative thing, saying, oh, okay, here's an opportunity to open the door to let more in, but also to fight that anxiety. It is anxiety provoking. Let's not not address that there is an anxiety about being the only other in the room sometimes. I think you just, it's about breathing. Really, I just take a deep breath and say no, and I think to myself, I'm not going to be quiet because I feel different. I'm going to speak and maybe open the door for more people. But I think we need to acknowledge that there is anxiety there and accept that you are going to feel anxious in these situations.
If I can weigh in, for me, I've always been prepared for hard work, and I don't think that's necessarily the key to success. But we're all here because we work hard, so that's not new. But as an underrepresented minority, I felt that everything that was given to me or that I achieved was an opportunity to make a mark, to pave the way for others. And my most effective mentors have been the ones that have empowered me in that sense. Not in oh, you got this position, great, but you have this position, what are you going to do with it? What will you do for your community? How will you pay it forward? And I've always thought of it that way. So it makes me feel empowered, not because I've done something for myself, but that there is support, even if people don't know. I'm trying to open doors for others. And that gives me a lot more confidence and gets rid of that anxiety.
We do have a lot of questions on the app that we're going through, but of course there's also a microphone, so please do feel free. Don't be shy of the microphone. But we can go through a few of the other the questions that are coming in. So there's a good question here about how can OHBM be more inclusive in terms of participation from a socio-economical point of view. So obviously it's an expensive organization to join and to attend the conference. So what are any ideas from this panel about things we can do to increase participation from those who might not be able to afford to attend the meeting?
Well, this is not my personal idea, not just official, just statement. But I think one of the big challenges is maybe research environment itself. But I think traveling it's hard. And OHBM is making a lot of discount of the registration fee, which may help. But still, maybe traveling is kind of challenging. There are a lot of challenges. Maybe one of the ideas can be maybe just making very small workshop locally in some of the area people feel challenges. Then maybe some of the speakers just come in to make a small workshop. Then in that case, I think people in those areas can be easily come in. That can be one option if the traveling becomes possible. But I don't have other magic ideas.
So some of the ideas is to host OHBM in many locations, which you do, right? To try and make travel more equitable for everyone. And I like the idea of maybe doing every other year online for organizations. So more people can attend virtually, and it's also good for the environment. So I like that idea. Yeah, those are the two that, and I think you already do a lot for just like, trying to discount. Obviously, there's always opportunities to link with other institutions, other organizations, and other funding mechanisms to make it more affordable or discounted, but I think that's something like you have to, it's a very long game there.
I do want to address this question because I've given it a lot of thought. I myself come from a pretty low social economic background, so I've had a pretty, I've been through those steps, and I think one of the good thing that OHBM has done and has continued to do since for a while is we've created the mentoring program, and part of that is to, provide year-long engagement, and the student postdoc group has done a great job of that, keeping it going and strengthening it. And it is not something that we've ignored at OHBM. We just don't know what the best solution is yet, and it's like a discussion that we keep having all the time, and we keep coming up with different ideas, and you'll probably see a few of these ideas rolled out in the next few years. And it's a learning process for all of us because it's not a simple solution. And this is why we need the engagement of our members so much. We need the feedback, we need the criticism, but we also need the constructive criticism, right, as to what we could have done and what could have been better. So this is my take on it. It is a very important topic, and it's not just a topic of, in the developing countries or in countries where the income is much lower than what people would pay to travel to, conference settings in Europe. But it's also an issue in North America. Like there are inequalities that exist, and people are from backgrounds that it takes them much longer to get to this spot where if somebody from a more, I guess, better circumstances gets there. And those factors actually have to be taken into account when we talk about excellence in science as well. And I don't think that's addressed too much. It's addressed, but we don't know how to address it. And we are working on that.
I have a question to follow up on something Natasha said about having more hybrid or virtual meetings. And just because we're, still in the pandemic and we're still sort of meeting in a hybrid fashion, how have you guys, have you had any positive experiences during COVID, been able to, give more talks, or have you felt that there's been more inclusivity or opportunities to participate in things during the pandemic, and are you afraid that those will go away when things go back to normal?
So this is my first physical conference since pandemic. So I'm very happy to see many old friends and hopefully make new ones. During pandemic, in terms of conference, to some extent, it was easier to book speakers, right? It was hard if someone asked you. It was very hard to say no because, if you're busy in the morning, you must be free in the afternoon. So we had, personally, I listened to a lot of very good and informative talks. I had made like YouTube playlist almost, which I would watch every other day. So I think that was as you said, Natasha, perhaps some of those things could be done where videos and other lectures could be curated for students to learn. But I also feel something is to be said about meeting someone in person, because I have never, I had attended OHBM and ISMRM by Zoom. There is not one time where I had spent more than an hour. It's like after a while we get bored. So I hope there is both.
I like the idea you said, Bharat, about curation. Like, I really think that would be a cool thing to do, to have like a repository of talks that are recorded at the online conferences that students and people can search. Yeah, that would be a great thing.
Well, maybe during the pandemic, what I tried is just maybe short talk session, then separately, there's only 3 speakers. Then 2 are just Japanese speakers, typically student and postdoc. 1 is invited speaker from different time zone. Then that was very enjoyable, very engaging with just 2-hour session. Then we can just pick anybody we want. Then we can just also give students and postdoc for training for talks. So in that way, in some particular format, I think we can just continue fully virtual or sometimes hybrid. But I think the problem is that type of conference couldn't just fully replace all the functionality of the large conference like OHBM. Because virtual poster session is always difficult. There's no chance to just students and postdoc interact with others, senior people. Then that part we cannot just fully replace in the virtual format, unfortunately. Then maybe you can just keep using both ways in effective use, depending on the goal. In some particular goal, I think virtual is quite useful, but maybe it's not useful for everything. So.
Thanks, everyone. I just saw a question pop up that I want to know the answer to, so I think I'll just put it out there. So the question asks, what should we do if our own, our own working culture, what we're brought up with, is different compared to the country's working culture? Like if we moved and you came to another culture and your working style and habit is completely different than what is expected in the new environment. How do you deal with this?
Well, while there are certain differences between culture, but there are a lot of similarities across culture, right? I say that across culture, if you ask what a teenager wants, it's all iPhone. so there are a lot of similarities. And while there are differences, we should not forget that, like, let's say we are in OHBM, like the fact that we are in OHBM, like we all have some interest in brain, right? And that is what bringing us together. And perhaps, we can do that by learning about brain, and in the process, if we have good Japanese food or Korean food or American food or pizza, so that's a, win-win.
So I'd like to answer that. I think it was, why is that difference there is a question I think you have to reflect on. Sometimes differences exist because there's a value difference, and that's important to know for long-term planning, for fit. But if it's more for pragmatic reasons, I think it's important to have a conversation, because those things are, like, values are hard to overcome if the difference is due to a value. But if the difference is due to just organization and differences in pragmatics, those are conversations that could be had, and you could have like a mutual kind of agreement that, this is my work schedule, I will still meet this timeline, these are the timelines, but this is how I work to get that timeline, and making sure you could have those conversations with whoever you're working with is important. But I think knowing if that difference is a value difference or it's just like a to-do list pragmatic difference is very important to assess on yourself.
Well, my strategy was maybe I just try to speak more, very much consciously. I just made conscious effort about it, because you guys just come into a different language zone, different culture. If you are silent, I think it's very easily you can be isolated. That's most tougher. But if you are speaking, people tell you there are differences, or people can just give you information. Then I think if you are just coming to a different culture, maybe it's better to have some conscious effort to speak, rather than if you are just staying in your home country or same language zone. But I think that moving to the country where the English is the primary language, there is a different challenges, because I think scientists all use English to some extent. Maybe you can just adapt quickly. The other part of the problem of the Asian scientists or institutions, then they are just recruiting new people. then I think their adaptation to local culture and language, actually the barrier is very big. Then I'm not going to mandate people who want to come to my lab to learn Japanese because it's very difficult language. But from other perspective, if you want to stay, enjoy making friends, then learning about culture, know more about it, maybe just learning local language helps. So it's up to the person's decision. But in those cases, maybe some interest willing to learn the local language may help.
There's still questions on the app, so I'm going to go ahead. But if there's anyone who wants to walk up to the mic, like I said, please feel free to do that. The ones that are popping up are getting upvoted here. Are there any tips for graduate students trying to connect to other mentors with similar backgrounds at a conference? So how do you find other, as a grad student, are there any tips for finding other mentors?
DM them on Twitter. That sometimes works. Email them.
I mean, if you have read, I'm guessing if you want someone else to be mentor, you better do some, I hope you have read some of their papers. And I would say that even if you disagree with their conclusion, if you say that I have read your paper and I disagree because of this reason, there's a good chance they will talk back to you. And perhaps that is another way.
Well, I don't have a magic advice because it's just too general. Well, I'm just trying to find my mentor in the postdoc. I just try to meet many people, but I think sending email to the faculty is sometimes challenging, especially if they're established, they don't even respond. But you have to recognize that's kind of normal because if you just get seniors, they get too many email. But maybe I think it's better to have maybe structured way to make your email who are you, what you are interested in, the reason for contacting you. Because sometimes, maybe it's not specific to Japanese, the student just making some ambiguous email. Because it's very unclear what is going to request, what you want, then some faculty people just simply miss. So just be explicit, then what you want. Then there are some chances you may find out people, then meet with them, then maybe you get some chance. But I don't think I have a magic advice. You should just try.
I also think there are communities out there, and so if you're looking for communities that do mentoring, you have to actively look. We can't give you the list of them, but if you look, there are mentoring communities out there that you can connect with as well that could make it easier for you to liaise with other members of your community.
Doesn't the OHBM mentoring try to match?
Yeah. I think the mentoring program does, but it depends on how many mentors. So I think I'm here because of my mentors. And there's no one mentor. You'll meet people in your life in academia that have qualities that that attracted you, that say, oh, I wish I was like that, or I wish I was like this. And the best way to maybe make a mentor is be interested in their work. If you're willing to, if you know their work, you can go have a conversation. And I've been very, I just ask. If I've had a conversation a few times with somebody I admire, I'm like, hey, I really admire your this, and this quality. I love your work. Would you like to mentor me? And I've done that often. And it might shock the person and they might run away. But most times, academics are quite giving. And there's no harm trying.
There's a person.
Okay, yeah, shout.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could speak speak to cross-cultural collaborations, certain challenges or expectations that there might be, and how I guess kind of the framework of that can be established to make sure that everyone's expectations are met, and like especially if there's differences in terms of like communication styles or how respect is expressed, how you find that's most smoothly navigated.
I should answer. Yeah, I had lots of international communication with US people, just German people, but I don't have a well explicit answer because I didn't get a lots of problem at this point. But sometimes maybe it's just better to be explicit in both sides because if there's some ambiguity, then if people have to read some underlying will or just read something between the sentences, maybe there are different cultural background, different interpretation. That's cause a problem. Then when just coming up to the first project meeting, maybe thinking about the role of each collaborator, what to do, then just make very explicit language. We are doing this, the goal is this, what's the role is. But some people are using very ambiguous things, and people from different culture, language, they are just in different ways, and maybe troublesome. So, yeah.
I agree. I think communication with your collaborators and having and like writing it down, like and just saying like I want to make clear that this is we're working together and this is how I operate, and putting it in an email because sometimes conversations are harder and you can always Google Translate. So sometimes putting it in an email so they could see it, and then there's also for protection like when you're a student. You want to make sure you get representation on a paper and things like that, that it's out there, that there is a clear line of communication, that something was said. Yeah, that's, I think, communication.
I guess if it's international collaborations, you also have to be aware of, like their national holidays and like little like things that you would do for your friends. I guess you would also have to do for your, just be aware. And yeah, I agree with Natasha, like sometimes even meetings can be unclear. I take the 5 minutes to write down the summary of the meeting and send it out to all my collaborators.
Okay, so I think, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for the talk. It's super interesting. And so you've all said that it's been really important to have really good mentors. And I mean, that makes sense. And I've also had, I'm a PhD student, and I've been lucky to have good mentors as well. And I've been in school in the States and in Europe. And I realized that, so I did neuroscience the whole way through. I've never had a professor who wasn't white. And I've never had a mentor who wasn't white either. And I've had really good mentors and really good teachers, and I just wonder sometimes if I not that I'm like missing out on something, but it's just how it is. I just can't remember ever being mentored by somebody who, not even who is necessarily Asian, but of any other minority group, other than women. And I was wondering, because there are some people who grew up, I think, in the States, or people who grew up in Japan and in India, and I was wondering what your experience was like, because obviously we want the best mentors, and that is what helps us the most, and it's kind of the same. We're not going for an ethnicity over experience or something like this, but yeah, so I was just wondering what your take on that is, because it's also clearly there's some value to be gained from having a similarity. Thank you.
Well, during your just PhD or postdoc, you couldn't just have an infinite number of mentors. That's impossible. So it's okay. If you have, also you're happy you're an mentor, I think that's completely fine. You couldn't do just postdoc 10 times, 20 times. That's not possible. So, but I think one of the compromise is I think if there is a program for short-term visit to other country and working with some other lab, I think that can be very helpful because before COVID funding, I just mentor maybe American student, Canadian students. They came in 2 months or 3 months. Then we are working together. Then it's very short. We can do just a real giant project. But after they are just coming back to Canada, US, I think they said it was a very interesting experience because they can see your own country or your own lab, the research culture from different perspectives. So that makes a person stronger. So if you have a chance, maybe just doing some short-term visits, collaborative project can be helping. Yes.
So I have some thoughts here. So I think it depends on your stage. Sometimes the kind of mentor you need, and there's a difference here to be made, right? So there's the research mentor, like there's mentorship as far as doing the research, who's going to provide you with the skill set, who could you collaborate with to get papers, and that's academic mentorship. And then there's career development mentorship, which is a bit different, and that's something maybe when you find yourself being drawn to people that are more similar to you, because as you grow in academia, sometimes you face different barriers along the way. And so then you look at someone that's overcome that barrier that is like you. And so that's a different type of mentor. So I think as you go through academia, you might find yourself being drawn to different types of mentors for different purposes. And that's great. I think you need different mentors. You need the academic mentors, you need the career development mentors, you need mentors in your personal life sometimes. And it changes over time.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, sometimes you just need people who act as life coaches. But I also think it's important to remember that you can have mentors from all different walks of life who are outstanding and help you in every single way and who look nothing like you and have a totally different background. That definitely has happened for us. But we've also had the mistake of thinking that someone who looks like you will be a good mentor. So don't assume that just because they share your background and they share your culture that they will actually advocate for you. We don't want to fall into a trap assuming everyone who looks like us is willing to help us. So, just be, realistic about this mentoring team that you build, and whether it's peer mentoring and at various stages, because not everyone will be there for you, and that's okay. You can cut out a mentor. So, the other side of the coin is not to expect too much from someone just because they share some characteristics with you.
I do believe what both Natasha and Lucina said. I think personally, perhaps you should not find a mentor based on their ethnicity. Perhaps if you're looking for a role model, maybe that can be done, as Natasha said, with a career advisor mentor.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those reflections and candid experiences. So I really appreciate it. And I think there's just 5 minutes left. We're going to wrap up, but I think the speakers can be around for 4 or 5 more minutes if people want to come up to the stage and ask questions informally. So with that, we'll just close the official symposium and thank the speakers and thank the audience.
Thank you to the organizers for organizing this.
Yes, thank you.
Nice job. Thanks, everybody. That was great. Thank you. Yeah, I think some people, I think people will come up to you and stuff, because this breaks down the barrier.